The morning Marcus Webb was arrested, he was carrying a bag of oranges. That detail matters. Not because of what it means legally, but because of what it says about who he was. Marcus was the kind of man who bought fresh fruit on a Friday evening. He was the kind of man who graded his students' tests over the weekend so he could hand them back first thing Monday. He was a math teacher, a father, a man who fixed his neighbor's broken fence without being asked and never mentioned it afterward. He was not a criminal. But on that particular Friday, in the fading light of a cool October evening, Marcus stepped out of his cousin Darnell's borrowed Dodge Charger, lifted his grocery bag from the back seat, and found himself staring at the flashing lights of 3 police vehicles that had appeared from seemingly nowhere. "Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them." Marcus froze. His daughter, Amara, was 7 years old and sitting in the back seat. She pressed her small face against the window and watched her father slowly raise his hands above his head. The bag of oranges hit the pavement. Several of them rolled into the street. He was handcuffed within 30 seconds. He was told he was under arrest for drug trafficking. He was placed in the back of a police car while Amara screamed his name from inside the Charger. Marcus said, calmly and clearly, "There has been a mistake." Nobody listened. Detective Sergeant Carl Noakes had been watching that parking lot for 6 weeks. He was a 19-year veteran of the narcotics unit, a man who believed deeply in his own instincts. He had built his career on what he called pattern recognition, the ability to look at a situation, at a person, at a moment, and know immediately what it meant. His colleagues respected him. His superiors trusted him. His record was long and decorated. 6 weeks earlier, a paid informant had called in a tip. A man known as Ray was moving product through the East Side. He drove a dark Dodge Charger. He operated out of a corner parking lot near the intersection of Elmore and 9th. The informant described Ray as a heavy-set man in his mid-40s with a full beard. Noakes had set up surveillance immediately. For weeks, he and his team photographed the area, documented movements, and built what he believed was a solid case. On the evening of October 14th, he saw the dark Charger pull in. He saw a man step out. He gave the order to move. What Noakes did not do, what no one on his team did, was stop and verify that the man stepping out of that car matched the description in the informant's tip. Marcus Webb was 34 years old. He was lean and clean-shaven. He had no beard. He had no prior record of any kind. His name appeared in no law enforcement database connected to drug activity. He had borrowed the car from his cousin Darnell 2 days earlier because his own vehicle was in the repair shop. None of that was checked before the handcuffs went on. The county detention center is a gray, echoing place. Marcus spent his first night there sitting on a metal bench, trying to understand how the world had shifted so completely in a single hour. His wife, Paulette, had been called. She arrived at the police station in tears, holding Amara's hand, only to be told that Marcus had already been processed and transferred. His bail was set at $75,000. On a teacher's salary, that number was impossible. Marcus remained in detention. He was assigned a public defender. Her name was Adiz Okafor, and she arrived on a Tuesday morning carrying a battered leather briefcase and a coffee that she had not yet had time to drink. She had been a public defender for 11 years. Before that, she had been a prosecutor for 4, a period of her career she did not speak about often, because it had ended with the exoneration of a man she had helped convict. That experience had changed her entirely. She sat across from Marcus in a small, windowless room and listened to him speak for 40 minutes without interrupting. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. Then she opened her briefcase, took out a yellow legal pad, and began to write. "I'm going to request full discovery," she told him. "Every photograph, every log, every piece of documentation they have. And I want you to write down the name of your cousin, his phone number, and the name of the repair shop where your car was being held." Marcus did as she asked. "One more thing," she said, standing to leave. "I believe you." It was the first time anyone in an official capacity had said those words to him. He had to look at the wall so she would not see his eyes fill. The discovery documents arrived slowly, and they arrived incomplete. Okafor logged every delay. She made note of every missing page, every document stamped unavailable without explanation, every gap in the timeline. She was not surprised by any of it. She had seen this pattern before. Systems that have made an error tend to move slowly when asked to document that error. But buried in the fourth batch of documents, a disorganized stack of surveillance logs that arrived on a Thursday afternoon, she found a name she had not seen before. Officer Troy Baines. He was listed as a secondary observer during 3 evenings of surveillance. His name appeared in a secondary log that had clearly not been meant to be included in Discovery. It had been filed incorrectly, tucked inside a larger report, easy to miss. Okafor read his entry for October 14, the night of Marcus's arrest, twice. Then she read it a third time. Baines had written, in small, careful handwriting, "Note, subject exiting vehicle does not match beard descriptor from CI report." Flagged verbally to DS Noakes. "Noakes, proceed on vehicle identification." She set the page down on her desk. She sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and issued a subpoena for Officer Troy Baines. The trial began on a Monday in February, 4 months after Marcus's arrest. He had lost his position at the school, not officially, not in writing, but the principal had called Paulette and explained, quietly, that it would be better if Marcus took a leave of absence while the case was ongoing. 4 months of no income. 4 months of Paulette working double shifts at the hospital where she was a nursing assistant. 4 months of Amara asking questions that nobody knew how to answer. Marcus walked into the courtroom in a dark suit that belonged to his brother. He sat down at the defense table, folded his hands in front of him, and looked straight ahead. The assistant district attorney opened the prosecution's case with confidence. She described a well-documented undercover operation, a flagged vehicle, a trained team of experienced officers, and a mountain of evidence. She used the word overwhelming 3 times. Adiz Okafor's opening was quieter. She stood in front of the jury, 8 women and 4 men, ranging in age from their mid-20s to their late 60s, and spoke without notes. "By the time this trial is finished," she said, "you will not be asking yourself whether the police made a mistake. You will be asking yourself how that mistake was allowed to go this far, and what it cost the men sitting at the table." She let the silence hold for a moment. Then she sat down. The first crack appeared on the second day of trial, during the testimony of the forensic chemist. The chemist, a careful and methodical woman who had worked in the state lab for 12 years, explained the evidence that had been recovered from the vehicle. She described the field test that had been performed at the scene, a standard presumptive test used by officers to identify controlled substances. The test had returned a positive result. Under cross-examination, Okafor asked the chemist a single, specific question: what was the documented false positive rate for that particular field test when used on common, legal compounds? The chemist answered honestly. 21%. Okafor then produced the final laboratory confirmation report, the full chemical analysis performed after the arrest. It had taken 11 weeks due to a backlog at the state lab. The prosecution had proceeded to arraignment, and then to trial, based on the field test alone. The laboratory report stated clearly, the substance recovered from the vehicle was not a controlled compound. It was a common vitamin powder. Okafor held up the report and faced the jury. "The laboratory," she said, "found nothing." The prosecution requested a brief recess. The recorded tip from the confidential informant was played for the jury on the 3rd day. The voice on the recording was rough and low. It described Ray, in specific terms: heavy-set, mid-40s, full beard, dark Charger with a cracked rear bumper. Okafor then displayed 3 surveillance photographs taken by Noakes's team, photographs from Noakes's own evidence file, time-stamped 1 week before the arrest. She placed them side by side on the display screen at the front of the courtroom. The man in the photographs was not Marcus Webb. He was older, broader, with a heavy beard. The Charger's rear bumper was visibly cracked. Okafor placed Marcus's booking photograph beside the surveillance images and said nothing. She simply stood there and let the jury look. Then she asked, quietly, "Are these the same person?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Detective Sergeant Noakes took the stand on the 4th morning. He was composed and formal in his dress uniform. He testified in the measured, confident tone of a man who had given courtroom testimony many times before. He described the surveillance operation in detail. He explained his methodology. He explained what he saw on the evening of October 14. He said, repeatedly, that his identification of the suspect was consistent with his training and his experience. Okafor's cross-examination was unhurried. She asked him when, during the 6-week surveillance operation, he had compared the informant's physical description against Marcus Webb's photograph in the police database. He said he had relied on visual identification. She asked him whether he was aware, at the time he gave the order to proceed, that the informant's description included a full beard and a cracked rear bumper, neither of which was present on the evening in question. He said he was confident in the vehicle identification. She asked him whether Officer Baines had flagged a discrepancy in the physical description before the arrest was made. There was a pause. 4 seconds long. The court reporter's fingers stayed still above the keys. "I was confident in my assessment," Noakes finally said. Okafor looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "No further questions," and returned to her seat. Officer Troy Baines was 26 years old. He had been on the force for 3 years. When he took the stand, he sat with his hands flat on his thighs and looked at the middle distance, not at Noakes. Okafor asked him to describe the events of October 14 in his own words. He did. He described the parking lot, the vehicle, the men who stepped out. He described, in a quiet and careful voice, noticing that the men did not have a beard and that the vehicle's rear bumper was undamaged. He described writing that observation in his personal field log. He described telling Noakes, verbally, before the arrest was made. He described Noakes's response, "Proceed on the vehicle." Okafor entered Baines's personal field log into evidence. It had never been disclosed in the original discovery documents. The prosecution had not known it existed. The assistant district attorney objected. Judge Harriet Calloway, who had been watching the trial with increasing attentiveness, overruled her. Then she overruled her again when she objected a second time. Baines stepped down from the stand and walked back through the courtroom without looking at anyone. On the 5th day, a document was entered into the court record that changed everything in a single moment. For weeks after Marcus Webb had been placed in county detention, 4 weeks into his impossible bail and his leave of absence and his daughter's questions, a man named Raymond Dupree had been arrested in a neighboring county on unrelated charges. Raymond Dupree's arrest photograph showed a heavy-set man in his mid-40s with a full beard. The vehicle associated with his arrest was a dark Dodge Charger with a cracked rear bumper. Okafor placed Raymond Dupree's photograph and Marcus Webb's booking photograph side by side on the display screen. The courtroom was very quiet. She placed the informant's description beside both photographs. She read it aloud, slowly, one line at a time. Then she addressed the jury and said simply, "This is the man the informant was describing. He was never Marcus Webb." She sat down. Juror number 7, a woman in her 50s who had been taking careful notes throughout the trial, set her pen down on the notepad and did not pick it up again. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and 20 minutes. They returned a verdict of not guilty on all counts. Marcus stood when the verdict was read. He did not react right away. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides, and looked at the judge's bench. Then, slowly, he turned to the second row of the gallery, where his mother was sitting with Paulette. His mother had one hand pressed flat against her chest, the way she always did when she was trying to hold herself together. He reached out and took her other hand. The district attorney's office issued a written statement that afternoon. It cited procedural irregularities in the evidence documentation process. It expressed confidence in the department's overall commitment to justice. It did not use the words wrongful arrest. It did not mention Marcus Webb by name. Detective Noakes was placed on administrative review. Officer Baines was quietly reassigned to a different unit. The confidential informant program that had generated the original tip was suspended while an internal audit was conducted. Adiz Okafor walked out of the courthouse into the cold afternoon air, called her office, and told her assistant to begin preparing the paperwork for a civil lawsuit. 3 weeks after the verdict, Marcus Webb sat in his car outside the school where he had spent 8 years teaching mathematics. He had been formally reinstated. His classroom was waiting. His students had sent a handmade card that covered the entire surface of his desk when he had gone in to collect his belongings during the investigation. 47 signatures, some with drawings of calculators and number lines, one with a carefully written note that said, "Mr. Webb, we know you didn't do it." He sat in the parking lot for a long time before going in. He thought about a lot of things. He thought about the 4 seconds of silence on the stand. He thought about the bag of oranges rolling across the pavement. He thought about Amara's face pressed against the car window, and the sound her voice made when she called his name. He thought about Officer Baines, who had written the truth in a small field log and told it again on a witness stand, knowing full well what it might cost him. He thought about how close it had come. How the lab report had taken 11 weeks. How Okafor had found Baines's log only by accident, buried in a misfiled document. How many small things had needed to go right for the truth to finally surface. And he thought about how many times, in how many courtrooms in how many cities, those small things had not gone right. About how many people were sitting in places they should never have been, waiting for a truth that was still buried somewhere in a stack of papers that no one had looked at carefully enough. He did not have answers to those questions. He was a math teacher, not a lawyer or a judge or a politician. But he felt the weight of them. Eventually, he picked up his bag, got out of the car, and walked into the school. Down the hall, in room 214, 22 students were waiting. He had work to do. End.